According to the 14th century historian and philosopher Ibn Khaldun, dynasties have a natural lifespan. The early years of a dynasty are characterized by expansive growth, a desert toughness, an ethos of hard work and little desire for worldly luxuries. The second generation of the dynasty continues in the legacy of the founders, but growth slows as leaders begin to place more emphasis on the luxuries of urban palace life than on administration and leadership. By the third generation, the decay of the dynasty is complete as the leaders and viziers are so consumed by luxury and pleasure that the state cannot protect itself from internal or external threats due to the negligence of the rulers. At that point, the cycle begins all over again as a new dynasty rises to replace the old, decrepit one. In this framework, the Muslim world in the mid to late 13th century was clearly in the third phase of Ibn Khaldun's dynastic theory. Incompetent leadership, the apathy of the warrior class and excessive wealth and luxury helped contribute to the Muslim world's inability to defend against external attack. In keeping with Ibn Khaldun's philosophy, a new dynasty arose to replace the old order. The House of Osman, a Turkish warrior in western Anatolia, would rise in the 14th and 15th centuries to become the premier Muslim power and usher in a new era of stability, growth and cultural magnificence. But, contradicting Ibn Khaldun's philosophy, this new empire would last far longer than just 3 generations. It would continue to be a world power until its fall in the First World War in the early 1900s. Son, be careful about the religious issues before all other duties. The religious precepts build a strong state. Osman, speaking to Orhan, Ottoman origins. Due to the Mongol onslaught, families of Turks fled Central Asia to find refuge in the borderlands of the Muslim world. The Turks, being traditional nomads, were capable of quickly and easily adapting to whatever lands they entered, including former Byzantine domains. Ever since the Seljuks defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, Anatolia had been open to Turkish conquest and settlement. When the Mongols entered the region in the 13th century, the remnants of the Seljuk domain were crushed for good, and Anatolia was ruled by numerous Turkish dynasties scattered throughout the peninsula. These small states, known as beyliks, were usually based around charismatic military leaders, known as beys. One bey, Osman, managed a small warrior state on the very edge of the Byzantine Empire. Out of the numerous beyliks in Anatolia, his was the one that would rise to become a world power. The reasons for this are difficult to ascertain, but the fact that his beylik bordered the crumbling Byzantine state was important. The Byzantines were a shadow of their former selves. The once mighty empire only controlled Constantinople, Greece and parts of the Balkans. By the early 1300s, they were still recovering from the disastrous Latin rule of Constantinople from 1204 to 1261, which effectively ended Constantinople's reign as the world's largest and greatest city. Osman was able to take advantage of the Byzantines' weaknesses and aimed at constant expansion of his domain into Byzantine lands. He was further aided in his quest by the fact that refugees from the rest of the Muslim world were fleeing Mongol slaughter, providing a valuable source of manpower to the small beylik. In this context, the idea of external jihad against the perceived enemies of Islam was revived as Osman led his soldiers in raids against the same enemy whom the Rashidun, Umayyads and Abbasids had fought against centuries before. The traditional establishment of the Ottoman state, Ottoman being a corruption of Osmanli, the Turkish name for Osman's empire, is considered to be 1299, although this date may be arbitrary, as the roaming band of warriors led by Osman and his son Orhan acquired more Byzantine towns. The Ottoman beylik began to resemble a stable state more than the territory controlled by a band of nomadic Turks. By the time Osman died in 1326, the Ottomans had captured their first major city, Bursa, which became the first Ottoman capital. Orhan continued, in the Ghazi tradition of his father, leading warriors against the Byzantines all the way up to the shores of the Sea of Marmara, less than 100 kilometers from Constantinople. He also began to adapt the Turks to a more sedentary lifestyle. The Byzantine cities in Anatolia were established urban centers with strong fortifications. The Ottomans could no longer rely on the traditional raiding tactics that had been so beneficial to the Turks for hundreds of years. Instead, they began to lay siege to cities, surrounding them and aiming to squeeze them into surrender. The Byzantines, being preoccupied with civil disturbances in the Balkans in the early 1300s, were unable to protect their last remaining outposts in Asia, and the Ottomans quickly expanded their domain. As the Byzantines weakened, the Ottomans strengthened. In the first few decades of the 1300s, they had gone from a small tribal band of warriors to the most powerful beylik in Anatolia, and a serious threat to the continuation of the Byzantine Empire. They were so much of a threat that the Byzantine Emperor Andronicus was forced in 1333 to meet with Orhan to discuss tributary payments to the Ottomans in exchange for the safety of some of the last remaining Byzantine fortresses. As the 14th century wore on, the Ottomans continued to expand into territory that had not seen Muslim armies since the Umayyad raids on Constantinople almost 700 years before. In the 1350s, the Ottomans crossed the Dardanelles Straits into Europe for the first time. Taking advantage of Byzantine disunity in the region, Sultan Orhan, and later his son, Murad I, were able to firmly establish Ottoman authority in parts of Thrace. The Turks, with their nomadic history, managed to easily move entire families and tribes into the new European frontier and establish new towns throughout the conquered lands. This huge demographic movement gave the Ottomans stability in an area that would have otherwise been a challenge to manage. The remarkable growth of the Ottoman state from a tiny Turkish beylik to a regional power in the 14th century was made possible by the unique intellectual tradition that the Ottomans built on. To the early Ottomans, their war against the Byzantine was a religious duty. The Ghazis, warriors of the faith, that fought under Osman, Orhan and Murad believed themselves to be continuing in the tradition of centuries of Muslim warriors who picked up arms against the Byzantines. Islam provided a unifying force for the Turks of Anatolia to rally under. By professing to be protectors of the faith, the Ottoman sultans managed to get thousands of Turkish warriors to fight under their command. With the recent, and still ongoing, Mongol disaster in the Middle East fresh on their minds, the promise of being able to bring glory to Islam once again must have been a motivating factor for the Turks. Islam was the only force capable of bringing together a disunited, nomadic and diverse group of people like the frontier Turks of the 14th century. With the Ottomans placing such an emphasis on Islamic tradition, the Muslim rules of war also applied. Back in the 630s, when Caliph Abu Bakr sent an expeditionary force north to face the Byzantines, he gave them strict rules about not harming civilians or private property, and only killing enemy soldiers. That tradition continued under the Ottomans, who seemed to have been remarkably tolerant of non-Muslims under their rule. As the Ottoman armies advanced into Europe, villagers were mostly left alone so long as they did not actively rebel against Ottoman authority. The freedom that the Ottomans gave Orthodox Christians contrasted greatly with the behavior of the Latin Crusaders a century earlier that raped and pillaged Byzantine territory for decades. In comparison, the Ottomans were lenient and fair conquerors. Furthermore, the aristocratic class of southeastern Europe was generally eager to seek help from the Catholics of the West in the face of Ottoman invasion. But the general population was not ready to see Latin domination of their lands once again, and they seemed to have supported the Ottomans in many cases, once they received promises of religious toleration. Thus, for both practical and religious purposes, the Ottoman policy of religious tolerance seems to have been the rule as they expanded into Christian Europe. The greatest period of early Ottoman expansion occurred under the fourth Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid I, r. 1389–1402. His soldiers nicknamed him Yildirim, meaning thunderbolt, due to his ability to quickly move his army back and forth between Europe and Asia. The yearly migration of his army meant that half the year was spent expanding the empire into Christian Europe while the other half was spent in Asia fighting against rival Turks and the partially Islamized Mongols. In Europe, he added territories that would remain under Ottoman sovereignty, until a wave of European nationalism swept through the empire in the 1800s. He conquered Serbia, Bulgaria and Greece, and was the first Ottoman to cross the river Danube into Wallachia. Constantinople itself was besieged by the Thunderbolt, although the Ottomans had neither the technology nor the numbers to bring that city to its knees yet. Even without that imperial city, the Ottomans were one of the most powerful empires in Europe and the Muslim world. That power attracted the attention of another Muslim ruler seeking to be the next great world conqueror. Timur, a Mongol ruler whose domain included Central Asia and Persia, sought to re-establish Mongol authority in Anatolia in the face of Ottoman expansion. Although Timur was a Muslim, his actions in war did not differ from his non-Muslim ancestors who had ravaged the region 100 years before. He wanted to bring back the Mongol Empire founded by Genghis, which meant the transcontinental Ottoman state would have to be eliminated. At the Battle of Ankara in 1402, the two great military leaders Bayezid and Timur squared off. The Ottomans, despite being reinforced by soldiers from the Christian vassal states of Europe, were decisively defeated. The great Thunderbolt himself was captured in battle and taken to Timur's capital at Samarkand. The Ottoman realm, meanwhile, was divided between Bayezid's four sons by the victorious Timur, who hoped they would fight each other enough to bring about the end of the Ottoman Empire. Coffee was first introduced by Yemeni Muslims in the 1400s. When the Ottoman Empire grew to encompass the Arabian Peninsula, coffee spread north to Istanbul, and from there to the rest of Europe. For the next 11 years, the Ottoman Empire was in a state of constant civil war. Bayezid's sons Isa, Musa, Suleiman and Mehmet raised rival armies and met each other many times in battle in Europe and Asia, each seeking to become the sole inheritor of their father's empire. The Ottoman interregnum, as it is called, showcases one of the inherent problems in the dynasty. There never existed a formal succession procedure by which sultans can be chosen. The Ottomans seem to have believed that the most able son would always arise somehow to win the throne after his father's death. This would ensure that only the best of the dynasty would become sultans, leading to an eternally powerful state. In practice, however, what this tradition meant was civil war between brothers that commonly erupted after the death of a sultan. This would continue to be a problem until Sultan Ahmad I formulated an official succession policy in the 17th century. In the early 1400s, however, the sons had to fight to the death. By 1413, Mehmet emerged as the victor over his brothers and managed to reunite his father's lands under his control. How he was able to do this militarily is not as important as why the Ottoman Empire was capable of reconstituting itself after 11 years of civil war. The main reason was the institutions that the Ottomans established throughout their realm in the 14th century. Above all, the Ottoman emphasis on Islam as a unifying factor helped bring Turkish leaders back under Ottoman control when Mehmet won the civil war. As the protectors of Islam's frontiers, the Muslim population of Anatolia and the Balkans looked up to the Ottomans. The division of the empire among four sons meant that unity and strength in the face of Byzantine power was compromised. When Mehmet emerged as the victor, the Muslims of the region could once again unite, as they had previously, under a strong Islamic state in opposition to the Byzantines and other Christian nations. Furthermore, economically, the Ottomans established a guild system that also made use of the Turks' Islamic identity. Throughout the Ottoman state, a loose system of guilds, known as akis, regulated manufacture and business practices. The akis were commonly intertwined with Sufi orders, and placed as much emphasis on the spiritual advancement of their members as they did on business and trade. This provided an economic basis from which the Ottoman Empire could reconstitute itself after the interregnum. Military traditions also played a huge role in the reunification of the empire. During Orhan's reign, an elite corps of soldiers was recruited that served directly under the Ottoman Sultan. These troops are known as the Janissaries, a corruption of the Turkish Janissary, meaning new troops in Quat. By the time of Sultan Bayezid, the Janissary corps numbered in the thousands, recruited primarily from the Christian populations of the Balkans. Since the Janissaries came from diverse ethnic backgrounds but were all incorporated into a unified corps loyal to the Ottoman state, they served to unify the various cultures and backgrounds that lived under Ottoman sovereignty. Greeks, Serbs, Albanians, Bulgarians and others contributed to one of the most prestigious institutions of the Ottoman Empire, something that rarely happened with the Greek Byzantines or Catholic Latins. In all, once Mehmet had reunited the empire in the 1410s, it continued with little residual hangover from the interregnum period. Under Sultan Murad II, r. 1421 to 1444 and 1446 to 1451, the Ottoman state continued to annex Byzantine territory, until all that was left of it was Constantinople and its environs. Murad attempted to capture Constantinople and finally eliminate the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, but his siege failed to defeat the city's massive walls. The challenge of conquering the seemingly unconquerable city would fall to his son, Mehmet II, whose name would go down in history as one of Islam's greatest military leaders.